Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, January 8th, and I want to start you off with something I saw this morning. Did you hear about Trump posting a video of Jeffrey Sachs talking about Syria on
No, I
his.
didn't.
So he
I've heard a
posted.
lot about Trump. I always hear a lot about Trump, but I didn't hear about any connection to Jeffrey Sachs.
Yeah, it's Trump is such a wild card.
He
I
sure
can't.
is.
I can't decide if he's an idiot or a genius. It's just oscillating back and forth.
Yeah,
You
I think
know,
he's
and
a
it.
little bit of both.
Okay, well, I'll play this video and I just want to hear your take on it. Okay, we'll get started.
The war in Syria. And you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government, starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzky, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you. Because he's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on. These are not even sensible terms.
Isn't that wild?
So
That Trump posted that
yeah.
video. I guess it was on Truth Social media. I looked it up on Truth Social. And I guess it was like a retruth is what they call it, or for a retweet of somebody else that posted that video and like an explanation of Obama getting involved in Syria. So he shared it, but also in the span of like 3 hours, Trump also talked about making Canada the 51st state,
Right.
renaming the Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America. Let's invade Panama. We'll buy Greenland, and so it's
Yeah.
a mixed bag. And then casually, nonchalantly dropping a truth bomb that Netanyahu wants us to go to war with Iran and get us involved in all these
in a
endless
way, I
Middle
found
East.
that the most interesting because you can explain the other things as being attacks on his predecessors, especially
Right.
Obama. And that's Trump's all about that. He belittles the people that came before him. But Netanyahu is supposed to be his good friend, and Trump has shown it shows to me a willingness to get involved in attacks on Iran. So I don't know what to make of that, but that was the most interesting thing. That's potentially the most significant of everything that was that Jeffrey Sachs said there and said so well.
Yeah, actually, just thinking about it now, the most likely explanation might be is that Trump just watched the first minute of the video where it was talking about Obama getting us into Syria, Timber Sycamore, because the post itself doesn't mention Netanyahu or anything like that. Maybe he
Right.
just saw it as like, series of mass. He was wanting to get us here. So maybe don't want to read into it too much,
Yeah,
but
I don't, because I think it's a mistake to ever read too much into any Trump statement, because he's all over the map. He'll say things, wonderful things, very true things, and then sometimes in the same speech or the same interview, 5, 10 minutes later, he contradicts it. I mean, that's Trump. But at the same time, I feel like he doesn't have a coherent philosophy. He's not consistent. He really can't be relied on to carry through with the ideas that he expresses. But you do get the sense that, that he's definitely not a neocon. He's not not a globalist. He's an America firster. And I think that's, what you see here. I mean, he's not interested in the wars for the globalists, but he wants Greenland. He wants Panama. He wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico. He's kind of an old-fashioned U.S. imperialist, kind of like a Teddy Roosevelt or something. And that's what he wants to be. I don't think he'll be able to carry any of this out. And it's actually all very silly and in the end, harmful to U.S. interests. But I actually prefer, if in fact he could be that person, I think it would, there's a downside to it. I'm not championing sort of crude American imperialism, but the old-fashioned kind, that was focused on the Americas was less harmful to the world, much less harmful to the world than the neocon version.
Yeah, we were kind of just saying that what we've seen with Trump's picks and who he's surrounding himself, there are a lot of these Zionists. It seemed like war with Iran was kind of inevitable. And then I saw this video and I was like, whoa, could this be, but maybe I am reading a little bit too much into it.
I think it's, maybe not be inevitable, but there's a very high risk. I mean, there always is. Just as Jeffrey Sachs pointed out that Netanyahu has had this obsession. He's had, he's targeted Iran decades ago. And he feels like that probably his time has come because he's knocked down those other rivals, Syria and Iraq. And, a lesser one, Lebanon, is really on the ropes. Lebanon's still standing. Hezbollah is still standing, but they're on the ropes. And so, yeah, he's no question he's going to go about, he's going to do whatever it takes. And unfortunately, I think there's every reason to believe that Trump's going to go along with him in some form. It's just a question of how far he's going to go.
What's the situation like in Lebanon right now? Because, we had that ceasefire deal that was reached, although it seemed like, Israel continued to breach it, but the bombings at Beirut went down. But then Syria collapsed. We haven't really heard much from Hezbollah. But that ceasefire was, a 60-day truce? I mean, we'll be coming up to the
truce, right? I think we have another 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe Israel's already, stated that they're not going to extend it. And Hezbollah says if Israel hasn't moved out of those, the territory in the south of Lebanon, which they haven't, and I think they have no intention of, again, they've showed very, very little. They've made virtually no effort to observe the ceasefire. Of course, they greatly reduced the number of bombings, but they haven't retreated. They haven't pulled out of southern Lebanon. They, in fact, moved forward in a few places and seized a couple of villages that they were not able to seize during the ground invasion when they were fighting Hezbollah. So, yeah, I think we're just going to see a renewal of the fighting, and. That's one area. Of course, Israel had a great deal of success in decapitating the leadership of Hezbollah, and then struck another blow against Hezbollah. Of course, it wasn't Israel by itself, but it was really, the United States and Turkey, I think, above all. But when we talk about United States actions in the Middle East, we're almost always just talking about Israeli actions. Why is the U.S. involved in Syria? It's Israel. There's really no other reason to do it. So because of, of the U.S. and Turkey, Syria fell. And that was another serious blow to Hezbollah because it cut the land route, the supply route from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And then another blow was Israel's advance its invasion of southern Syria. They took all of the Golan Heights and then moved farther north and took land just to the east of Lebanon. And so now they have, they're able to attack, they will be able to attack Hezbollah from two directions now, not just from the south, but also from the east. And I think that seriously complicates things for Hezbollah. Again, Hezbollah, fought very effectively during the ground invasion, so they still may be able to hold them off, but it's going to be tougher than last time when it happens.
Right. I was going to ask you if Hezbollah still has much capacity to fight. I don't know how crucial that Syria link was for you between Iran
it's hard to say.
And Lebanon.
I think in the short run they must. I don't think it's. I think in the long run it remains to be seen. It needs to be pointed out that for example, Iran does not have a land link to Yemen. And yet the Houthis clearly are being supplied by Iran. I don't see how they could be developing these missiles on their own. So there are ways to get, to supply Hezbollah by sea. And I'm sure that's going to happen. But I think, it just will be more difficult. They won't be able to get as much to Hezbollah. But maybe Hezbollah, I don't know. Honestly, I really do hope for the best. And Hezbollah has proven itself to be an extraordinarily resilient organization and fighting force. And, and maybe they will continue to be. I certainly hope that they will. But it's going to be hard. I mean, they're facing some very severe challenges. They're a relatively small group within a small country, a poor and divided country that is surrounded by hostile powers now.
Yeah, I feel like the stage of the Middle East right now is it's a big Mexican standoff. Everybody's just waiting, has their arms pointed at each other. They're just waiting to see who will move first. Is that kind of how you would assess the situation?
Well, yeah, I think, Israel is getting ready for, again, I think there's no question they're going to go after Iran. And they are just laying the groundwork for that upcoming attack. Part of what they did, another thing I didn't mention was that they basically destroyed the military infrastructure in Syria, above all the air defense systems. And that was an impediment, to attacks on Iran. Again, people kind of say that now it's just completely open now. That I don't think it's really it makes that much of a difference, but it does make things easier for them. Because they always had, the eastern part of Syria, and they also had that, from what I understand, that access to the northeastern, or rather the northwestern corner of Iraq, which borders Iran. And that's, it was through there, through Jordan, through eastern Syria, and through northwestern Iraq that they attacked. And they were, and that really hasn't changed. So it just becomes easier. They can fly directly across Syria. I guess it's a more direct route. But perhaps more importantly is just that in the past, Syria and the Russians were able to warn Iran of attacks. Like when the planes took off from the Israeli military bases, radar installations in Syria picked this up and would transmit that information to Iran. And now I think Iran has lost that. So that is a blow. But it's, they're still going to, so there'll be a delayed warning, but there'll still be a warning. They'll be aware when they're starting to approach the Iranian border. So they'll just have less time. And I think that, again, they do have very robust defenses, and they're only going to become more robust over time as their cooperation with Russia increases.
But do you think that an attack on Iran is almost guaranteed?
I think it is. I mean, you just have to look at Netanyahu. I mean, again, Jeffrey Sachs did a wonderful job of laying it out. And this man has been obsessed with this for decades, and he does not let go. And I think he sees this as his life's work. And this will be his legacy. That's the way he's looked at it. He's the man who, he again helped to bring down Iraq, again using the United States, and Syria, to a great extent using the United States. But the great prize is Iran. That always has been. And for at least 25 years, he's just been, beating the drums for war with Iran. And now, I think he feels like the time has come. And he does have, in spite of this video that, again, that Trump put out there, I think he probably very strongly believes that he's got the right man, behind him now. Because though, in general, as I was saying, Trump is not a globalist, he's not a neocon. He's always had a bee in his bonnet about Iran, going way back. And, we saw the Soleimani assassination. On the other side, as I've mentioned earlier, he is reluctant to get the U.S. involved in a war. But again, that's that conflicts again with his extreme Zionism, his support for Netanyahu. So I think we're going to see an attack, and it could be a joint U.S. attack. I don't know what the extent of the American participation will be, but I think it'll be significant.
Well, Iran is about to sign a defense treaty with Russia now, right?
Well, it's not exactly a defense treaty. It's a very comprehensive agreement that does involve defense and security issues. We don't know the details of it, but it's not likely to be a mutual defense pact, which Russia did sign with North Korea. And a mutual defense pact obligates each party to actually come to the defense of the other party if the other party is attacked. And I'm sure Russia is not going to do that. They know Iran's going to be attacked, and they do not want to be drawn into a direct war with the United States and Israel. But there is, I'm sure there's going to be a very large defense and security component. They are going to do what they can, to build up Iran's defenses. And if Iran comes up, under attack, they will supply them. They'll be there backing them up with military and possibly economic aid as well.
Do you think China would do the same?
I think so. Yeah, I think they all, like I've said before, I think they all understand that they're in this together, right? That the U.S. has become their mortal enemy, and they can't just stand and watch, one of the other two parties go down, because that makes them more vulnerable to future U.S. attacks. They have a very powerful incentive, to keep all, to ensure that all three of them, remain standing and able to resist the U.S. empire.
So this is just pure insanity. That there's no way that you're gonna win. I mean, if it's backed by essentially the two most powerful countries, Russia and China, in their own backyard, this isn't going to work. I mean, Russia, I think you can argue is the most powerful military in the world. I know that's going to trigger a lot of American bros, but that's the reality. China is the manufacturing belt of the world. It has the largest population, or I guess maybe second to India. But India is part of BRICS. Isn't going to be coming to the aid of the United States. It's just complete suicide. So I mean, don't you think Trump would realize that? I mean, Netanyahu would realize that? I just don't understand. I always come to this. It's like, this is pointless. Yeah. This is silly. This is impossible. Why are we even contemplating this? And you're saying that it's almost a guarantee that's going to happen, and it's going to happen with USA.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's guaranteed there's going to be some major attack that, maybe will be directed against nuclear facilities within Iran. Again, I think, it will fail. It may very well do some damage. Again, if, you fire enough missiles and so forth, something will get through. Iran does have good air defense, but it's not as good as the Russian air defense. So even with the Russian air defense, again, eventually something gets through. If you fire enough missiles, you send enough drones, and you can do some damage. There's no question about it. So I'm sure they will do damage, but they can't. They can't destroy the Iranian nuclear program, much less destroy Iran or bring about regime change through an attack. So I don't really know what this is going to do. A lot of it depends on how Iran responds to it. Now, we've been expecting an Iranian response. It was almost like better than 2 months ago that they swore that they would respond, and they haven't. It's getting to the point where if they do, it's almost the deterrent effect just really won't be there.
Right.
And I don't know what's going on. It may be that there's some. They feel like, again, maybe they need to improve their defenses. That's something that Professor Morandi put out there, that because they began to realize that the U.S. was going to be involved directly in the next attack. They can easily fend off Israel. That's what they feel. And, I guess they proved during the last Israeli attack. But a combination of the two is going to be more difficult, and they maybe need to beef up their air defenses. And if that's true, that makes sense. You say, okay, yeah, I said I was going to do this, but let's not, you don't want to fire a gun when you know that you don't have adequate defenses, because the other side is going to fire back. And maybe that's what's going on.
But you think that Israel and the U.S. would think about that as well? I mean, we want to talk about air defense. Do you think Israel has a better air defense system than Iran?
Well, it's hard to compare the two, because Israel is a much smaller territory. I mean, Israel, you could say, is able to cover its entire territory, and Iran can't. But, that's actually also to Iran's benefit. At the same time, they can't cover their entire territory, yet that also makes it more difficult for attacks on the Israeli side, right? Because they can't focus on one, a limited scope. It's a vast country, Iran is. As for the equipment, I believe they have, they have S-300s. It was reported several months ago that the Russians sent them S-400s, which is a very, very advanced system. It's probably the best in the world. The S-500 is coming online, but I think and they've developed their own, which are actually really nothing to sniff at. So I guess I would say, again, it's a little bit like comparing apples and oranges, but that Iran has better air defense. The Iron Dome that everybody talks about is really just designed to deal with Katyusha rockets from southern Lebanon and from Gaza. It can't deal with medium or long range ballistic missiles. And then they've had the Patriots, but we've learned the Patriots really have are really inadequate in many ways. They have the THAAD, and I think recently they have shot down some missiles from Yemen. I think like the last 2-3 that Yemen had fired, they actually brought down. Of course, previous ones have gotten through entirely. And we're just talking about like one missile coming in, from Yemen. And okay, yeah, they shot it down. That's something. But, if it's going to be attacked from Iran, they're going to be more sophisticated weapons. They're going to be a lot. They're going to overload the system. They already proved they can get through and do a lot of damage. So, yeah, I would give the edge to Iran.
Right. In air defense, and also in just offensive capabilities. And what we've seen in missile technology, Israel doesn't possess that type of missile arsenal that Iran has. So there's this constant, I feel like, and this is to the benefit of Russia and Iran, is that they overestimate their adversary. And it's the opposite for Israel and the U.S. We will always underestimate. And so I just feel like if they are playing that game where we need to bolster things up, they're just playing it super safe. I just feel like Iran is probably over-prepared and in a good way. Obviously that's a good thing for this conflict. And the U.S. is completely underprepared. I mean, I don't think like these bases that are in the U.S., in the Middle East, I don't think we're really doing anything much with them. I mean, I would be definitely on edge if I was an American military personnel out there, just like, okay, what are you guys doing? You want to attack Iran? Does any air defense systems for us, or they don't even really work that well? Even if you do send us one, what are we doing?
Well, they've already shown, the Iranians have already struck those bases, and with great precision. They did it in a way they gave the U.S. warning, actually, and then so that there wouldn't be any casualties. But they were able to strike them very precisely, and the bases didn't have air defense to bring those missiles down. So yeah, those are just all sitting ducks. And the Pentagon, I think, understands that. It's not. There's always been resistance with the Pentagon to these, attacks on Iran, but that there has been, but the pressure to, as we see, in the end, the Pentagon doesn't make the decisions. The decisions are made in the Oval Office.
Are they made by Netanyahu? I mean, it's
maybe they're.
It's just insanity. I think. I mean, if Netanyahu wasn't behind pushing this at all, this wouldn't even be on the table. We wouldn't be talking about it. Right? It's like,
well, yeah. The thing is, he's been pushing it so long that it's actually kind of like the support for it has been institutionalized within the U.S. So you have people that have been convinced and kind of been, that are just sort of part of this. The whole U.S. foreign policy establishment has been converted to Netanyahu's view of things, pretty much. And so, yeah, it's not much of an exaggeration to say that the decisions being made back in Jerusalem and not in the Oval Office, but it's not much of an exaggeration to say that. But let's say immediately in the end, the orders have to be given by the commander in chief. He has to go along with it, and the Pentagon can drag its feet, it can protest and whatever, and clearly it's won a lot of these arguments in the past. But as we see, the pressure, in the end, they have to give in. If the neocon faction in the end has its way, like we saw with the missiles. The story is actually, I think it came out, and maybe it was a New York Times article recently, that the decision to lift the restrictions on ATACMS fired into pre-2014 Russia was made back in April. But it wasn't, but the Pentagon resisted. And, clearly, we saw they fought it tooth and nail, and so it just... The decision was not implemented until after the election in November. And we may see something similar with Iran. I mean, it's just like the Pentagon has actually, and the intelligence community has resisted the push to attack Iran. I think, again, they understand how difficult it is and how vulnerable their own assets are in the Middle East. But the pressure has been relentless. And in the end, they have to obey orders that come from the commander in chief.
You just think that there would be some type of self-awareness from the United States, like the Pentagon was telling Biden over and over again. If the decision was made by Biden in April and the Pentagon resisted for 6 months or more, right? I mean 7 months, and then the ATACMS get used, Storm Shadows get used. After all this pressure, and we saw nothing happens. Yeah. If I was Lloyd Austin, be like, I told you so.
Right. Like, well, probably that's what's happening behind the doors. That's right.
Right. So, I mean, then you think that there might hope there would be a little bit of humility within the establishment and a little bit of...
There's no humility within the establishment.
Okay, maybe not humility, but at least rationality, right?
Yeah, very little of that, too. Yeah, but there's some.
So you're just saying that we're just steering a ship... we're headed straight for that iceberg, and we're just full steam ahead. There's nothing.
I think there's no question there will be some kind of attack on Iran. I would be very, very, very surprised if there isn't.
Okay.
And attack again involving the U.S. in. They were involved in the previous attack. Again because they provided refueling, aerial refueling. But I think it's going to be more extensive this time.
Wow, it's insanity. It's wild. I mean, if this happens and see how much the U.S. gets involved, I think it's really going to just send shockwaves through the U.S., especially if like those bases in the U.S. get wiped out, or like what would happen if they sunk in one of our aircraft carriers? Right. One of these giant multi-billion-dollar.
Yeah. Well, they may, actually in the past, and this is. Again, as Professor Morandi pointed out, it's like when the aircraft carriers are are in the Persian Gulf, the Iranians just relax because they say, okay, they're not going to attack us now because they're within easy range of our missiles. But when the aircraft carriers, turn around and head away, 1,000 miles off the coast there, that's when the Iranians get nervous. Uh, so I think probably would get our aircraft carriers out of the way, but you can't get the bases out of the way, and they clearly are very vulnerable. So we can see, again, the Iranians have shown a reluctance to escalate, but they've shown that they will respond, already with these two strikes. And if it's a major attack, I don't think there's any question, but that they'll respond in a significant way. And if we keep on pressing the attack, if it really becomes a war, then I think those bases are going to go.
Are aircraft carriers essentially worthless now?
In my opinion, they are. There was, Mark Sloboda says, they are vulnerable, but he pointed out that the Chinese have built a couple of them recently, and so he kind of takes that as proof that they still have their value, and they do have value in dealing with lesser powers, but I think even that's not even so clear anymore.
Right.
Because
what
you
about
can
Yemen?
always get, right. Because you could always, like Yemen doesn't have the ship killing missiles, but Russia or Iran could supply them with it. That's the thing. So, I think that, it's true that the Chinese have built these recently, but the Chinese they're not invulnerable to kind of to the prestige factor, if I can put it that way.
Oh, they're very vulnerable. I see it in China all the time. They
it's like
some
we gotta
crazy
have
construction projects.
Yeah. And so I don't think it makes military sense. I mean, they're so expensive. You're talking about these multi-billion-dollar craft, and one of these can be brought down by by missiles that cost less than $1 million, and it just doesn't add up to me. So I think that it just didn't make military sense. It was a matter of prestige. It's like, we too have our aircraft carriers.
Mm-hmm. Big floating islands, very expensive. But I don't know. I've just been thinking, I'm like, I don't know if these things. I had the same line of thought. I was like, maybe they could be used to kind of subjugate really small nations like Papua New Guinea. But I was like, well, maybe they'll find a way. Papua New Guineans would find a way to get these cheap drones from China and just pester them and hit them with little things and just, the Houthis obviously haven't sunk, any American war vessels, but they've hit them, they've damaged them, and though it hasn't been confirmed, it's that at least 2 aircraft carriers may have been hit already. They turned around and went back, and they claimed that it was just some sort of routine maintenance procedure. But many of us suspect that actually that they've already been damaged and had to be repaired. And then we'll just send them back out there for the Yemenis, the Houthis, to take more pot shots at and cause another couple $100 million worth of damage and supplies refueling and head back. It's so silly, so wasteful.
Yeah, no, that's
okay. Well, I want to maybe switch over to just some just politics in general within the West, because I'm sure you saw the news of Trudeau resigning, right? And then I feel like Western leaders are beginning to fall like flies. We had the French government and the German government collapse in a vote of no confidence just a month or two ago. We had the Romanian elections annulled because Gorgescu won and he was the wrong party. We're just seeing Keir Starmer, I think, has reached record levels of unpopularity, and Elon Musk is going after him personally, telling him to get out. So what do you make of all this? Have the wheels fallen off or are falling off of the Western machine, the globalist hegemonic elite? Is it, what's happening?
Yeah, well, it's clear that they are very unpopular. I mean, there's just no question about it. It's hard to think of kind of a globalist leader anywhere who's very popular. Not Macron, not Schultz, not Starmer. Trudeau just resigned. Biden and Harris were defeated.
Right, and people like Fico was almost killed, assassinated by a
Yeah,
pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian person. I mean, Trump was
right,
too.
pro-Ukrainian.
There was a
Yeah, yeah,
Trump.
that's
There was
true.
assassination attempt there. So it just
Right.
feels like the wheels are falling off,
Yeah,
or have fallen
yeah.
off. So
Well, I think it's clear that um, again, in most of these cases, I mean, in every country, it's generally almost always domestic issues that are at the forefront. And so it's easy to, I think, exaggerate like the pro-Ukraine policies. It's in there. I think that in general that they're those are not popular positions. I mean, especially, I guess in Europe again, more so than in Canada and the U.S. Um, but it is domestic issues that really determine elections by and large. And clearly just on that score, these governments are not popular. Now, the big question is, do we have real alternatives? And I don't see any real alternative in Canada and a lot of these countries. Of course, there are alternatives. There's AfD, which is literally the alternative for Germany. And, there's National Rally. There is the Freedom Party that actually is now going to form a government in Austria, and that is an anti-globalist party. So again, in Europe, maybe it's because of Europe's position is more desperate. I have more hope for Europe. I mean, because you do see real alternatives in Europe. Parties that are truly dissident parties and are, they're dissenting from the globalist line in a significant way. And I don't see that in the U.S. or Canada. That's the problem. You find individuals, but you can't find a party. Trump occasionally says things, or he puts videos out there that are great, but Trump is just not a reliable person to carry through on any of this. Yeah, so yeah,
as long as
but clearly, the establishment is in crisis. It doesn't have the popular support. It's an elite phenomenon. I think that's the thing to point out. Like among the elites, there's rock solid support for these globalist positions, both on, domestic policy and foreign policy. But they really just don't have the popular base. They're sometimes able to win elections, but it's the enthusiasm is not there.
So as long as quality of life in the U.S. and Canada is somewhat decent, then you don't think there's going to be much of a change. It'll take some real domestic problems to arise.
Probably, yeah. I think so, yeah. And those very well may happen. There clearly are, let's say storm clouds on the horizon. We have an unsustainable debt. It's growing at an unsustainable rate, and that will at some point, become a crisis. It's not a crisis yet, but it could at any time. And then we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll see some real alternatives arise at that point. But right now, I just don't see them. I mean, again, you can point to individuals, but you just can't point to any parties in either Canada or the U.S.
If these alternative parties take hold in Europe, and they begin to kind of turn their back on the United States and the U.S. clearly no longer the global hegemon. They maybe don't have the world reserve currency status. What does that mean for us in America? Will we just see our quality of life just drop through through the floor? I mean, what happens exactly?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, think about it. It's like the U.S. policy towards Europe has had a disastrous effect on European economies. The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, the pressure to cut, trade links with China, the near complete severing of economic links with Russia. It's all been very much to the detriment of Europe. Europe has really suffered, and actually, a weak Europe is not to the benefit of the U.S. a prosperous Europe, that we could trade with and support us, in various international venues and so on, is to our advantage. But by weakening Europe, we really haven't made ourselves more prosperous. It doesn't work that way. Economics is not a zero-sum game. It's not win-lose. It's really win-win. And a prosperous Europe would have actually added to the prosperity of the U.S. So actually, if the Europeans kind of, defeat the globalists within Europe and become more independent, become truly sovereign nations again, I don't think that it hurts the U.S. Again, we've talked about that. It's just like, it's actually, the empire is not something that has made the U.S. stronger and more prosperous. It's quite the reverse. And if we just let that empire grow, it would actually be to our own benefit.
You mean not let the empire grow?
Okay, yeah, I meant to say let it go, not grow.
Let it go. Right.
Let it go. Right.
Yeah, let Europe go and grow independently and trade. Normally, a prosperous Europe that we can not have to control is to our benefit. We'll see if that happens. But something else that I've been seeing that kind of fits in the same type of framework is that I'm sure you saw the news that Indonesia has become a full member of BRICS. And then when I hear that, I'm not so sure how to take what that means when a country has become a full member of BRICS. In my mind, I'm looking at it as there are two big teams now in the world. There is the multipolar team, the one run by essentially Beijing and Moscow, the BRICS team, versus the U.S. global hegemony, U.S. empire team. And then when a country joins BRICS, I'm thinking of it as they are making a firm statement that I am exiting this U.S. empire game, turning my back on this, and putting my foot firmly in the camp of the new multipolar world. Is that the best way to look at it in terms of this framework, that this is really the significance of BRICS and what it means when countries become full members or partners of BRICS?
I don't think that's overstating it. My understanding is that if you become a member of BRICS, part of becoming a member of BRICS is saying that you're not going to, impose sanctions on other parties. And so you have, to at least to some extent, you have declared yourself independent of the U.S. Now, again, BRICS is really it's not a team in the same way. They don't have a hegemonic vision. They don't have a unified vision of, what we're about, what our ideology is. But it is about, right, sovereignty and independence from saying that, that becoming a member of BRICS is let's say at least it's a step away from dependence on the U.S. and towards independence and sovereignty. I think that's what we would have to see in the case of Indonesia. Indonesia, for a long time, was kind of a very faithful vassal of the United States. And I think this is a signal that they are stepping away from that. Sort of like, again, Saudi Arabia is doing something similar. We don't know what Saudi Arabia, actually, its relationships to the BRICS is right now, but they've at least taken a step towards the BRICS. Now, India has become a full member. Not India, but rather Indonesia has become a full member. And that is a statement that they're making a very serious step towards becoming non-aligned. And they are saying that, okay, we are no longer vassals. We're no longer kind of faithful servants of the U.S.
Right. Yeah, these two conflicts, I think, have been the most damaging thing imaginable to the U.S. empire. Because I imagine Indonesia is, the countries all through the global south have been watching what's happening in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. But they've also been seeing what we've been doing in Gaza, how we support Israel. And, Indonesia is a Muslim country, predominantly so. And, how we just continue to support Israel and say there's nothing going on when there's a genocide being live streamed. Especially across the Muslim world, they're much more in tune with it. Right. Do you think it's these two things that are primarily moving countries to join BRICS? And that's why we're seeing this huge if we just juxtapose to what's happening
Yeah.
in BRICS nations versus what, we were just talking about Western Europe, how it seems like every Western European government's in crisis in some sort. Whereas,
Yeah.
BRICS is the opposite. It's
Right. Yeah, I think there's no question that the two wars have had a huge impact on the world, on the way the global majority looks at the United States and and Europe, and it's affected their ties with the United States and Europe. There's no question about it. Another factor is just the relative economic decline of the U.S. too, and the rise of China, and and we have to say of Russia too, that Russia actually is showing robust growth. India is doing quite well too. So it's just I think if you look at growth rates of the BRICS nations compared to the G7 now, it's got to be stronger in BRICS.
do you think that it's fair and correct to say that our sanctions on Russia has actually helped the Russian economy?
Well, it's hard that seems to almost defies economic logic, but the truth is that after I guess the economy contracted some in 2022. There were predictions that it would contract by 20% or more, and that didn't happen. It may have been like 1 or 2%. It wasn't much, and then they turned around. They grew a bit, I think, last year, in 2023, and then quite a bit. In 2024, they had strong growth, close to 4%. Which is very significant. It's hard to argue, with those statistics. At the same time, in general, like I've said, when you have economic, relations, it's something that's mutually beneficial. So if you end those relations for non-economic reasons, like which is what happened when the West imposed sanctions on Russia, and more than and those relations, those direct relationships, they've tried to interfere with their trade relations with other countries, and they continue to do that. That has to harm Russia to some extent, but it doesn't seem to have harmed them very much. And there may be something to. I think there may have been sort of like a mindset within Russia that it's like, oh, the West is superior, and so many we have to rely on them. Their technology is better, their cars are better, their perfumes are better, their cheese is better. And when a lot of it, I think, was just sort of a lot of maybe of what Europe sold to Russia was really wasn't necessarily any better, but it just had that kind of snob appeal or something. So when the sanctions were imposed, and you can no longer buy French cheese or something in Russia. Okay, well, it turns out actually Russian cheesemakers can do it themselves, and that's what Russians have discovered. And I think probably in that and many other cases, it actually has been to the benefit of Russia. Where they were forced to discover, hey, yeah, we can do this too. We didn't have to get the French version or the Italian version or whatever. We can make it just as good, or it's maybe very nearly as good. In some cases, maybe they find out they can make it better. And I think that's what Russians, has been a kind of an awakening within Russia. It's really made Russians more confident, and you realize that, okay, yeah, we're not the inferior party.
Right.
They did have something of an inferiority complex before.
Right, or they're able to get it from China if they don't do it themselves,
Yeah, well, that's true.
and
Right.
at
Yeah, I
probably
think
a
back
fraction
in
of the
many-
cost.
Yeah, right. Like, for example, with like maybe before they still buy iPhones or whatever, but there was a reliance on Apple products or whatever. And the fact is, and I think they still get them, but the fact is that the Chinese can make those just as well, if not better, at a fraction of the cost. And it's really just sort of a prestige thing. I've got an iPhone. Yeah, well, Huawei makes
right. Huawei, Xiaomi, or makes
Xiaomi,
really good.
right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe what happened is that when these sanctions got placed, there was that initial contraction, but it ended up kind of reinvigorating the global South. Kind of when they saw what was happening, these assets frozen, mm-hmm. They're like, whoa, okay. Then it strengthened these economic ties between Russia and all these other countries. And it started paving these new pathways that I think other countries are finding beneficial, and realizing that we don't need the U.S., we don't need the Western world, and that in itself may be the most crippling, damaging thing to the U.S. empire.
Right. Yeah, no, this right. The launch of the SMO, and probably even more importantly, the Western reaction to it, has had a huge impact on the world, and I think the most significant part of that impact is what you just described.
Is there a recognition now, at least from the West, that these sanctions have failed?
It not officially. It comes out, like, even in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, these major news outlets do have articles in which various officials or think tank personnel do admit that, hey, it really hasn't worked. But it's kind of like, it's not being shouted from the rooftops. It hasn't been made part of the official narrative. It's just being kind of whispered on the sidelines. This isn't really working out. But you won't get a leading U.S. politician to go out and say that. I mean, the official, the official position is that it's hurt Russia already, and it's actually greatly weakened their economy. And with one more sanction, the Russian economy is going to collapse. That's what you hear, and what you've been hearing for the last 2 or 3 years.
Right. Yeah. And the world has changed so much in the past 3 years. Just when I think about the position of the United States prior to the SMO, it was just completely different. I still had this idea, there's still this sort of consensus of U.S. primacy in the world.
Right. Yeah,
and it's completely gone now.
Yeah, it's changed my own perceptions. I knew that Russia wasn't a gas station masquerading as a country, that kind of thing. I knew that was ridiculous. I knew that Russia had a diverse and relatively strong economy even, back then. But I kind of assumed, again, because you look at the statistics, Russia, even when you use purchasing power parity, PPP to measure the economy, which is really the right way to measure an economy. It tells you what the real economy is. It is the 4th largest in the world, but still the U.S. is so far ahead. And when you combine all of Europe, the two of them together, still, are greatly, are much larger than the Russian economy. And just looking at that, I kind of assumed that Russia really couldn't take on NATO in the long run, and that's turned out to be false. That's actually to my surprise too. I mean, that clearly these statistics, they're hiding something. They're not revealing the full reality. And I think we see it when we're talking about productive capacity. And, maybe much of the Western economies have value, but it's kind of it's a value of intangible services and finance and that kind of thing. But it's not a value that reflects real things, and real production.
Right. Yeah, every day that goes by where we're involved in these conflicts in Ukraine and the support of Israel and the genocide in Gaza, I think it just becomes more and more apparent to the world that, well, we're more morally bankrupt for one, but that also that we don't have primacy. We can't, all of our tools for subjugation no longer work. The economic sanctions, the threats of military or regime change.
Right.
We're seeing regime changes fail now. It's becoming, it's just the mask is falling off. We've talked about that before.
Yeah,
and I just feel as it continues to go along, more and more people will wake up and come to the same realization that we have come to, just observing these conflicts over the past 2-3 years is just more and more people are going to have their eyes open. And so that trend of the U.S. empire losing its position or people becoming aware of its true position in the world is just going to accelerate. It's just going to continue. And there's nothing to turn that around.
Right. Well, I do have to point out one exception to your statement, your assertion that the U.S. can't, bring about regime change, and that's Syria. That's one place. That was a country that they brought down. Of course, they had two very powerful allies in this effort, both Turkey and Israel. And Syria was a war-torn and, a small, poor country. And they physically seized a large part of the territory, the most economically valuable part of Syrian territory. So, it is an exceptional case, but they did bring it down. One statistic that I heard recently, I knew that Syria was in bad shape, but I didn't realize how bad the conditions were there. I think just prior to the collapse, in the years leading up to the collapse, the Syrian economy was only 15% of what it had been before the insurrection began back in 2011.
Oh my goodness.
15%.
Wow.
And it wasn't a very wealthy country to begin with. So that's, and when you think back to that, you kind of understand why it collapsed as rapidly as it did. It wasn't.
Right.
Of course, they were getting some support, like Iran was providing fuel and Russia was providing wheat, but it just couldn't make up for that 85% that they lost, anywhere close to it.
Right. I mean, the U.S. sort of set it up for the regime change, but in a large part it was Turkey more than anything. So it's not a clear cut, on the regime change. I actually saw something. I believe it was on RT. I just read the headline this morning, right before we started, saying that Israel fears that it could be come into conflict with Turkey. Do you believe that there's something to that? There's something there? I mean...
Yeah, well, there's potential, Again, they're pretty far away. I mean, Israel's down in southern Syria and probably will stay down there. Turkey's up in northern Syria and probably will stay up there.
But Turkey...
But in eastern Syria, they are, they have conflicting interests. I think clearly that Israel wants the U.S. to stay there and the Kurds to remain independent there, the YPG, and Turkey does not. So there is a potential for some kind of conflict. We'll see what happens. Again, I'm afraid it may be just the end of Syria. I don't think that Syria is ever going to be put back together again.
Isn't HTS, this Al-Jilani guy, isn't he essentially Erdogan's puppet? I mean, and so in a sense that is Turkey, and then, it's kind of weird. I don't understand what Al-Jilani's deal is. First, I think he knows he's in a precarious position, and that's why he says he's not going to attack the Israelis now. But then he's also asking the Russians to stay, and it's just, the whole thing is just...
Well, again, I think the reason he's asking the Russians to stay and he's being careful not to attack the Russians, clearly some order went down, don't touch the Russians. Because the Russians were all... Yeah, exactly. It's Erdogan. Because I think Erdogan backstabbed the Russians, but he also understands that his relationship with Russia is very important to Turkey. And so he just had to, he has to make it up to the Russians in a way, that's partly, and it doesn't really cost him anything. So why not just make sure that, that all of his, the HTS and these other jihadist groups there make sure that the order goes out that they don't hurt Russians. That's kind of a low-cost way of paying back the Russians, or trying to reestablish it's never going to be a friendship, but the relationship between Russia and Turkey. He's saying he wants the Russians to stay, and I think it's just because of Erdogan. I think the Russians are going to leave, or they're going to leave in all but name. I think it would be wise for them to leave. I think staying there they would be making a mistake similar to what the Americans have made in Iraq. They just become a target. There's really nothing they can do. I think that those bases do have some value to them. For example, they do have radar installations and early detection systems that are helpful to the defense of Russia, and to Iran too. So there, maybe there's a case for them remaining there, retaining some kind of limited presence. Interestingly, Mearsheimer has a different theory. I go with the theory basically. The reasons that Jelani is saying, oh, please Russians stay. It's again, it's Erdogan behind it. Erdogan wants them to stay for various reasons, but Mearsheimer says that it might actually, we might actually see some kind of like a alliance develop within Syria, like between HTS, the Russians, and Turkey, against the Americans and the Kurds in eastern Syria, because I think Jolani is going to realize is that, like, okay, yeah, why did Assad fall? It was partly because, again, the oil fields and the wheat fields were under American Kurdish control. We need to get that back. We're not strong enough to get that back on our own. So, we need maybe Russia and Turkey to help us to get it back. But I don't think the Russians really want to get involved in it. I don't think they're going to actually help HTS. So I don't see that happening.
Yeah, it's strange because I don't know which side HTS and Erdogan's on fully. Like what's because if we had this Operation Timber Sycamore. It's what we started that video off with.
Right.
To remove al-Assad. We finally did it. And then we got somebody that you're saying that, or Mearsheimer's is saying that was potentially wanting to remove the Kurds in the U.S., out of there. Like we just hurt ourselves. But that's par for the course. Every move we do does seem to backfire and end up hurting America. But clearly that's not our intention.
Right.
We wanted the Russians out. We wanted a chaotic Syria. I guess the Israelis got what they wanted.
It was Israel. Again, we really do the Israeli bidding in the Middle East, and it's what Israel wants. Israel wants a chaotic, divided Syria, and they got it. And it's not to the benefit of the U.S., but it is to the benefit of Israel. Probably, some people argue that it'll come back to bite Israel. I really don't see that. Not anywhere in the foreseeable future. I think it really has been to the benefit of Israel.
Do you think that as long as Israel's around, we will always be beholden to Israel and our foreign policy, at least with regards to the Middle East? Like that's...
Yeah, unfortunately, barring some sort of, even a disaster, I think it's just like the ties, the devotion to Israel at both the elite and the popular level are just so strong. We've spoken about there are disturbing trends, from a Zionist perspective. They're disturbing. The younger generation, mostly on the left, but not entirely. Even on the right, there is a drift away from Israel, and that may mean trouble down the road.
I'm going to tell you what, that trend's going to explode and accelerate if Trump gets us into a conflict with Iran. Because people will realize that why are we doing this? That this is because Netanyahu wants this. He want to use
if
the
American
US.
soldiers start to come back in body bags, and then it really will. I mean, if it's just an air war, it just stays limited. People can watch it on TV and be entertained by it. But if it means the loss of American life in any significant numbers, it will be a real problem.
Okay, well let's end it there.
Okay.
The Middle East is just this powder keg that I keep on looking at and just waiting for it to blow, and it just feels like it's going to it's could blow any moment now, and I just keep on looking at it, analyzing it, and seeing.
Well, in a way, there already have been explosions. It's like in Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, but now we're looking at the big. Potentially the real,
the big one.
The big one is Iran, and I think that's coming up. There's just no question about it. That's just on the agenda.
No question about that, really.
I don't see how. It's just so clear. Again, I think Jeffrey Sachs again just laid it out perfectly. There's just no question that he has been obsessed with Iran, and here it is. He's not going to walk away from a chance to attack Iran now, and he has enough, influence in the U.S. to just make American support happen.
That's why it's going to be so disastrous for the global economy, though. I mean, we're at the Strait of Hormuz. That's where, like,
Yeah.
what, 30% of all the oil goes through there. They will close that down. Everything will go into chaos. I just can't believe we're even considering it. And it's just because
Right.
Netanyahu
Again,
wants it.
I think Iran is going to try to avoid it's only going to do things like that. Like attack American military bases, block the Strait of Hormuz, if it becomes a true war and their backs are against the wall, and then they will do those things. I don't think there's any question about it, and they can. They will succeed in doing those things. But yeah, we'll see. It depends on the extent of the attack, the Iranian response. If it really does spin out of control into a full scale war, then we'll see all those things. And you have to say there's a real possibility, because again, I think that's where Netanyahu wants to go. And we can see that Netanyahu, sometimes he doesn't get what he wants right away, but he seems like he always eventually gets what he wants.
Yeah. Yeah. He might be the world's greatest politician. Then I hate the man, but he is a wily political actor. He knows how to work people. So.
Right. Both within Israel and in the United States. That's the thing. It's like he's kind of... He understands American politics very well, and of course he understands Israeli politics. He's like a cat with 9 lives. There's a lot of times when they thought, okay, that's the end of his career, but he always comes back. He always does. Again, he's facing real threats within Israel, but I think the smart money is always on Netanyahu. He always survives.
Damn. Okay, crazy. All right, well, let's end it there, Dad.
Okay.
Okay, have a good rest of your day.
You too.